Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to St Mary's Vicarage on this November the 20th, a Friday. Here we are at the weekend. We're about halfway through the second lockdown, though it's obviously been very different from the first. And we're at the weekend today. Weather's not looking fantastic, though I have to say it was great. Yesterday afternoon, Mrs. Vicarage and I went for a nice walk, which was good to get out and get some fresh air. Now, some people have been asking me about the cat. Spats is doing all right. We took him to the vet. He had a very sore paw, and cats are quite funny animals because they sort of bumps and scrapes and stuff, but he was in a lot of pain with this. He didn't want anybody to touch it at all, but the vet thinks it's probably something he's done in a fight, and it may have happened a week ago. She couldn't see a sort of bite mark, but he's obviously got an infection underneath. The good news is that it wasn't broken, so but there we go. That's male cats for you. The churchyard, I think, is sort of village cat hunting ground. There's quite a few cats that get into the churchyard, and unfortunately every so often they square off against each other, and fur goes flying and such like. But there we are. But he's feeling a bit sorry for himself. He's getting his antibiotics and such like, and normally he's a very bouncy cat and jumping around all over the place, but he's sort of having his meals and then finding a nice warm place to curl up, but sensible animal. So that's the update on our Alex, who's up in London at Royal Academy of Music. Well, he too is well into his 14-day self-isolation. He had a COVID test late on Wednesday evening, I think. After a bit of a fiasco. So he was told to get a mail order test that took quite some time, over 2 days to turn up. And when he turned up and opened it, it was missing bits of the kit, and it didn't have the return envelope in it. Test and trace, eh? There we go. So he had to ring them up and then was told to go down to a walk-in centre, which he did. So hopefully we'll get the results today. But considering the sort of symptoms he's had, which thankfully have been mild, we will be surprised if his test doesn't come back positive. But apart from that, he's okay, and because his entire cohort have had to self-isolate, and many of them have, in fact, I think all of them have come back with positive tests. The college there, I think, have been fairly good, and they've because it's obviously a very practical course if you're learning to sing and dance in the theatre, but there is some academic work to it as well. So what they've done is they've shifted things about a bit, and they're focusing a bit more on the academic side of stuff. So they'll get a little bit of ahead of that. So I think they've been fairly good at that. Anyhow, so there we go. And of course, today we must say many congratulations to the Queen and Prince Philip on their 73rd wedding anniversary. There's a lovely photograph of the two of them taken at Windsor, because you can see the round tower outside the window. So I hope they have a pleasant day. And of course, anybody else today celebrating their wedding anniversaries of whatever number of years it is. So and it also made me think this morning too about the many couples who this year have had to cancel or postpone weddings, move them to next year, or those who did, in a sense, bravely go ahead because it was just not possible to change things, and in a sense didn't have the wedding that they imagined that they were going to have, but let's hope they have the married life that they're going to have. So also thinking of all of those. Now, of course, on the news at the moment, it's very interesting in a sense, and sort of slight irony to it, that of course this week is anti-bullying week in the country, and I know virtually all of the schools in the land will be having a focus on anti-bullying week. Our own school here at Sixpenny Handley will do. And it's important to remember bullying is a very complex thing. It's not a simple thing to understand, though it is something that does need to be dealt with, but it needs to be handled carefully. And of course, what we now have is a very senior member of government in Priti Patel. A report has been put together, though it hasn't been officially published yet, so we're not exactly sure what's in it. But if the leaks and such like are to be believed, the allegations that she bullied others in her place of work are that there is some truth behind them. Then that's it's a very complicated thing, and it's not an easy thing for the Prime Minister to deal with. And I think it's important that the checks and balances are in there. Now, clearly and absolutely, bullying should not be tolerated in any form whatsoever. And I experienced quite severe bullying when I was at school. First went to boarding school, and subsequently in my own ministerial career, though I've not experienced bullying personally, though on one occasion somebody started to go down that line, but it didn't last very long. But I have been an advocate for several clergy who have found themselves in that situation where they've either been bullied by other clergy or by senior clergy or by members of their own congregation. And I've been involved with the sort of process of dealing with that. So I've seen it firsthand, and I've seen the effects that bullying can have on an individual. And you know, particularly adults, and it's very, very destructive. So it really can't be. It's just not acceptable, no matter who you are. So the Prime Minister needs to, in its sense, make that very, very clear, and you know, regardless of who the person is or isn't, the example needs to be set. And a very clear message needs to be made to all of those in positions of authority in government that bullying is not acceptable. However, that said, at the same time, what you don't want to end up doing is bullying the bully. And of course, social media will probably have a field day with this. And I'm sure Mrs. Patel may receive awful text, tweets and emails as a result of this. And of course, that in itself is bullying, and it's not acceptable. And the interesting thing with bullying is, if you look into it and listen to people that deal with it a lot, is that, you know, bullies bully for a reason more often than not. And it can be something that had happened to them in the past, or some unresolved issue in their own life, feelings of insecurity, all sorts of things come into that. So as well as absolutely making the point that bullying is not acceptable, and also looking after those who have been victims of bullying, at the same time, if we're going to be a just and fair society, we need to look after the bully. And we need to try and help that person to get to the bottom of the issue of why their behaviour results in bullying. So I'm not the PM, but if I was in his shoes, my response would be that unfortunately it would not be acceptable for Mrs. Patel to remain in her post if the report does clearly say that she had bullied members of staff working for her. But at the same time, I don't think she should be sort of just hung out to dry and discarded, because we need to care for her too. And in, you know, most good organisations, that person should be offered some support and counselling and some retraining to try and understand why their behaviour, why they do that, why they bully. Because otherwise, you leave the bully in the situation that they've never had a chance to resolve the issues that cause that behaviour in the first place, and then there's nothing to stop them when they get another job or go to another post. And let's face it, you know, somebody as prominent as Miss Patel is you know, is not going to just sort of go back home and read a book for the rest of her life. She will, even if she is not the Home Secretary, will probably remain in politics, or she may go into business or something else. And it's really important that that issue is dealt with, so that when she finds herself in another role or position of authority and power, that she doesn't repeat the bullying on others. So it's quite a complex issue. And I think it's really important to remember that. We can get very het up about bullying, and I would be the first to say it's not acceptable under any circumstances. But we must have, in a sense, a holistic approach to this, both dealing with the needs of those who have been bullied, who have been victims of a bully, but also helping and supporting the bully to try and come to an understanding about their behaviour, and to help them modify their behaviour and deal with any issues or problems that they may have had themselves. You know, many bullies have been severely bullied themselves in the past. So we don't know Mrs. Patel's background, her family upbringing, what happened to her in the past. So all of that needs to be dealt with. I think our Prime Minister has a wonderful example, in a sense, to both be strict and fair and upright, to be strict and to set an example, but at the same time to be compassionate and open to the idea that you know, all parties involved in this particular incident need help and support. The real crime, I have to say, will be if we just see some sort of political whitewash and nothing is done, because that will send out an appalling message to the nation that you know, bullying is acceptable, and it isn't. So it'll be interesting to see what happens today. But as the things start flying around social media, and I have posted something myself in this anti-bullying week, let's try and have a holistic approach to what is happening, and to all people involved in that situation. It's quite important. Anyhow, there we are. Never a dull moment, even though we're locked inside. So looking at this weekend, of course, unfortunately, we can't gather together collectively for worship. And I have been scratching my head to try and think of, you know, how imaginative we can be. I am going to do a live stream the service from the church again. It is the Feast of Christ the King, which is quite an important feast. And I have ummed and ahed about this, but I am going to do a Holy Communion service on Sunday that will be streamed. Now, I appreciate that that means people at home won't be able to take Holy Communion, but I hope, in the sense, in sharing that online service, we can, in a sense, receive something spiritually from it. And my address will focus on this idea of servant leadership. So I hope that will be great. We will sing some hymns and we'll have some music, because we can do that from home. Now, I apologise because there was problems with the sound last week, and I'm struggling to get to the bottom of them. I know the two new microphones, the microphone and receiver that we bought, they are functioning properly because I have tested them. I have a concern that because I use my very, very aged iPhone 6, this is what gets used to live stream the services from church, or if we're outside or something. I have cleaned it up a bit, and I've tried to clean the microphone plug here, but I have a feeling this might be the problem, that you know, that it's quite old, it's been knocked about a bit, and maybe the connection inside isn't quite as good as it was. So I will be doing a little bit of a test, probably on Saturday, just to sort of see if we've got this microphone problem. If you remember, what is happening is the sound fades in and out. Now, what that means is that the iPhone, rather than using the very special and effective microphones that we've bought that you plug in, it's not linking to them. So this is why I think something might be wrong with the little 4-pinned in, this sort of little jack plug here, because I made sure it was seated in properly. But if something is not right in here and the connection isn't good, it doesn't shut off the microphone on the phone. So the phone microphone gets used, and unless you're right close to it like this, that's when you get this sort of fading in and out of sound. So I do apologise. I'm not likely to be getting a new phone anytime soon, so I'm not quite sure how we will overcome that if that is the problem. But we'll see what happens. I might be able to use my laptop to film, but it doesn't quite work in the same way. So we'll see what happens. So hopefully the problem with the phone will be resolved, because I have tried to clean that jack plug. I know it works with the headphones fine. I don't lose any sound there, but it's an unusual thing that has 3 points in it, and 2 are to do with sound and the volume, and the third is actually the microphone bit. So we'll see what happens. Anyhow, so there'll be a Holy Communion on Sunday, live stream from St Mary's for the feast of Christ the King. So hope you'll be able to join me there. We've put services out. The Downsman is being published. And as I've said, you'll see that the service pattern or rota for December and January is fairly sparse, and that's really because we have no idea what we're going to be able to do and not to do. And it's looking likely that even though the lockdown is supposed to be lifted on the 2nd of December, that we're not going to sort of go back to how things were before. There will still be quite strict restrictions in place, and we're also hearing on the news and such like that the government is trying to, in a sense, they're talking about the 5 days of Christmas, trying to sort of have a time when people will be allowed to go and meet families and such like. But it's very difficult to we're not going to be able to hold big church services. That is absolutely clear. So unfortunately we're just going to have to sort of deal with this and make the best of it. But hopefully there are plans to really decorate St Mary's Church, and Pentridge I think are also looking at this, to really decorate the church, and here in the churchyard do something quite special so that people can come into the church and at least have a sort of feeling of Christmas and such like. The Church of England also released these booklets, which I'm going to get some copies of. When it arrived, I thought it was going to be an Advent reflection, which they normally produce, but it's called Comfort and Joy, and it actually starts from Christmas Day, and it takes you right through from Christmas Day to the 2nd of January. And the format of it is it's based on the sort of 9 lessons and carols. So there's reflections, there is a carol there, and a reading. So that's what it's based on. So I'm going to get hold of some of these, and they'll be available for people. I think they come in about packs of 50, so I'll get a pack of 50, and these will be available to people if they want to use them in their own homes. But thinking about that, what would be interesting is to hear people's ideas of how they can, what ideas you might have of, in a sense, incorporating the spiritual aspects of Christmas in your own home, and how you're going to do that. Obviously, we put our trees up and tinsel and lights, and you might have a crib and things like that. But just to think about how we might, in sense, engage with that spiritual aspect and that aspect of faith, and celebrate Christmas in our homes. Now, it's very interesting because Christianity, particularly Western Christianity, it's become very church-based. We sort of do our faith in the church. We're very reliant on the church building. But of course, other faiths don't necessarily have that focus. So in the Jewish community and the Islamic community, though of course they have the mosque and the synagogue, and they are important places, there's a far greater emphasis on faith at home. Faith at home. And I am part of a working group that's actually exploring this, particularly with children and young people in schools. So I'd be interesting to hear any ideas of what people have got in a sense of how can we express and engage with our faith at home, either on our own or with our bubble, if we are unable to gather in the church. And as I say, our Islamic and Jewish friends are much better on the whole at this than we are, because a lot of the important, in a sense, religious practices happen in the home. So for example, tonight, the eve of the Sabbath, because of course the Jewish Sabbath is on a Saturday, traditionally a Friday evening is when families gather, and there would be particular prayers and such like that are said, and there is a sort of a ritual at home that happens at home. It's independent of the synagogue, and maybe we need to sort of learn a bit more about that. So it'd be interesting to see if anybody's got any ideas that we can share. But it's going to be a different Christmas, but hey ho. So today, from Exciting Holiness, we've got some really great saints at the moment. Today is the feast day of Hilda, Abbess of Whitby. Hilda was born in 614 of the royal house of Northumbria, baptised in York, and at the age of 12 by the Roman missionary Paulinus. She was later an influential lay leader of the church. She was encouraged by Aidan of Lindisfarne to become a religious, and subsequently established a monastery at Strenskashkill, Whitby. This house became a great centre of learning and was the meeting place for the important Synod of Whitby in the year 664, at which Hilda's role was that of reconciler between the Roman and Celtic traditions. Well, as to be said, the Roman traditions won out, really. She is remembered as a great educator, exemplifier in her nurturing of the Canon's gift of vernacular song, and she died on the 17th of November in the year 680. So Hilda of Whitby, and I particularly like these. We had two here. Yesterday we had Elizabeth of Hungary, and we had Hilda of Hilda today. Both of them were lay women to begin with. Of course, they weren't ordained in those days, but it's really important to remember the huge influence that women have had on the history and the shape of our church today. You know, the whole argument that seemed to rumble on for 20 years about having women bishops, when you really start to think about things, seem to be a completely pointless exercise, and we should have just had them. Well, that's my opinion. But you know, because these women have influenced, had a great effect on the life and teaching of our church over the years. So that's Hilda, Abbess of Whitby. Now let's have a little reading from Ephesians this morning. This is a letter of Paul to the Ephesians, chapter 4, verses 1 to 6. I, therefore, the prisoner in the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope, your calling, the Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in all. It's a short reading, but it's quite a powerful reading. And it's a reading that the church really needs to hear at the moment. The rest of the outside world probably aren't aware of the fact that a report is being published called Living in Love and Faith. And the report is all to do with the issues of human sexuality in the church, which the church has failed to grapple with not just the past 20 years, but centuries. The church largely influenced by the teachings of St. Augustine, to be honest with you, has really struggled with this idea of what does it mean to be human. And in a sense, the incarnation, the idea that Jesus Christ, as we will celebrate, comes down to earth as a baby, and the doctrine of the church, regardless of what denomination you are, is that Jesus was both fully divine and fully human. And as I mentioned, I think maybe it was last week, the church has had no particular problem with the idea of Jesus being fully divine. What the church has struggled with is the idea that Jesus is fully human, because that has all sorts of other implications. That if he's human, he has to react in certain ways the same way that we do. And of course, when you bring issues of human sexuality into that, it becomes quite complicated. Now, we have no idea what particular sexual orientation Jesus was. He never married. He did seem to surround himself by women, but he was also surrounded by men. And he made a point in his life that he did turn things upside down. He allowed women to be part of the inner circle of the disciples. He allowed women to be in front of him when he was teaching. And of course, he appeared to Mary Magdalene and gave her the Great Commission on the day of resurrection. He didn't appear to one of the men first. So, you know, even by today's standards, that's unusual. Back then, it was massively radical. And Jesus had a very different way of seeing people. I don't think he necessarily saw them as, you know, define them by their gender in that sense. He saw them as completely as who they were. That's the advantage of being fully divine, because he knew each of them fully because he was God. Unfortunately, as human beings, we like to pigeonhole people. They're male, they're female, they're black, they're white, etc., etc., and the list goes on. We categorize people, and the trouble with categories is that you know, it can give us a sort of a false representation of what a person really is. And I think this has been the struggle, in a sense, with issues around human sexuality. We want to define a person solely by their sexuality, and the church has been particularly bad at this, I have to say. And of course, what we find is there's a sort of a pendulum that swings, which is that on the one side of the pendulum, you get what I call that sort of old-fashioned approach to human sexuality, which is, you know, it's a private matter. It doesn't. We're not interested in what people get up to in their own bedrooms or private homes with who, and that's that. And now you get a sort of a pendulum that's swung the other way, which is very much to the left, which is, I think, can be equally as destructive, which is that everybody has to wear their sexuality on their sleeve and be defined by it. And I think that's crazy. I'm heterosexual, I'm married, I have 2 children. But being heterosexual doesn't define who I am. It's part of who I am, but it's not all of what I am. I'm, like all of you and like everybody else, quite a complex being. I'm artistic, I like art, I have faith, I'm religious. All sorts of other aspects come into the fact to make me who I am. You know, my sexual orientation is not the sole thing that defines me as a person. And in fact, it's of all the things that define me as a person, it's actually fairly small. You know, and I think that's a problem. And what we see now is that there's almost this sort of campaign, and we see it in the church, that the people are solely defined by their sexuality. And actually, that's a really terrible, terrible thing, because, you know, I have many gay and lesbian friends. I have had for years. And I don't define them by their sexuality. You know, I don't walk round to my gay friend's house when we can visit to go and see them, have a meal and a drink, or to go out. And I don't say, "How's being gay, my friend, today?" It would just be ridiculous. In the same way They don't come and see me and walk through the door and go, how's being heterosexual today? They don't. I go and say, how's life? How's work? Who's driving you bonkers? And this, that, and the other. You see, this is the problem when we start to pigeonhole people. And sadly, I think that the church has walked down this road. So if you have somebody in your church community who is gay or bisexual, that seems to be the sort of huge thing about them. You know, that, and we forget to look beyond that and actually see who they are as a person, what they're like as a person, what drives them in their life, where, you know, what's important to them. And that, in a sense, is the concern of this report. Now, the report's going to come out. We're going to be able to discuss it in our parishes, and we're going to be able to discuss it in our deanery synods and all that sort of thing. But already on social media, some of the sort of sites I keep an eye on, in a sense, the sort of pro-gay sites, the sort of anti-gay, the conservative religious lot, already the mudslinging is starting. And when you drill down, you've got to understand there's a lot of hurt and pain going on in all of this. There's a lot of hurt and pain, particularly from the LGBTI community, because, you know, they feel that they're not valued as full human beings simply because of their sexual orientation, and they're pigeonholed because of that. And then on the other side of the coin, there's a lot of hurt and pain because of a conservative interpretation of scripture. People genuinely feel that if they don't hold on to that, they are abandoning God, and somehow their salvation will be in jeopardy. So it's all quite hot potato stuff. However, when I look at the Gospels and I look at Jesus and what St. Paul wrote here in this letter to the Ephesians, this thing about love and humility, and to see beyond what we maybe first see in a person, and that it's all about relationships. And when Jesus walked the earth and in his ministry, we see him not putting those human barriers up and that pigeonholing that we so often do as human beings. He hung around and he ate and he spent time with people who the rest of society regarded as outcasts, unclean, unfit to be in a synagogue, etc., etc. The list goes on. And he got a lot of flack for it. But he wasn't prepared to walk down those roads, because when he looked at a person, he saw a child of God. Whether it was Zacchaeus up the tree, Nicodemus in the garden at night, all of these were on different spectrums of things. He saw that. And the only thing that seemed to make him angry, where he was sort of chastise either his disciples or the Pharisees and such like, is where they were blinded to this, where all they wanted to do was to pigeonhole a person. You know, the woman caught in adultery. Ye who is without sin, cast the first stone. I think it's some of the most powerful words that is there. Jesus is, in a sense, not really talking about sin. He's talking about being human. He's talking about being human and not pointing the finger at others. He's reminding those people standing there about to stone that woman that in the eyes of God, we're all fallen. We're all in need of God's love. We're all in need of redemption. And if we throw stones at other people, even metaphorical stones, in a sense, we are failing to fulfill what God wants us to be, which is to be his children and to be united in unity and fellowship. So those powerful words from Ephesians are worth us holding on to and reflecting as the church begins those discussions. However, as I reminded one of my as I was reminded by one of my good friends recently, because I was quite annoyed about a fairly, it was quite a hateful post that had come from a particular conservative evangelical group in the church that they put up on Facebook. And I was quite cross about this, because it seemed to be that once again people were just being pigeonholed. And it was a few weeks ago, before lockdown, and I recounted this to them, and they said something I think that was really quite important and made me sit up. And they said, you know, Richard, the trouble is, what you're forgetting is we don't actually care what the church thinks about anything. And I think that was an important thing, because we can live in our own churchy bubble and we can think all of this is hugely important for us, but to those outside, they've moved on and it's not an issue and it's not relevant. And until we can really understand that, we will constantly fail in the mission of the church, because we're so wrapped up in our own agenda and our own bubble that we really fail to see where people are today in the world. And if you listen to that fantastic interview by Barack Obama on TV or on Radio 4, he made this point, because he talked about his own children who berated him and his wife Michelle for some of their views. And you would think sort of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama are pretty liberal. Kate and I have had this too from our own boys. And in a sense, he said he's cautiously optimistic that, you know, what we see in America at the moment with the whole Biden-Trump thing and all of this, that and the other, that actually our young people have moved on from this and they don't view people in these pigeonholed terms that maybe we have done in the past. Anyhow, I'll shut up there because I've gone on far too long, but I thought just an important reflection. So, Friday, do have a great Friday. Enjoy this evening. Hope you have a nice drinky poos or whatever. The cocktail cabinet will be open here at the vicarage and the martinis will be flowing. And I hope you have a good weekend and blessings to you all. Let's just have the collect for Hilda. Eternal God, who made the Abbess Hilda to shine like a jewel in our land, and through her holiness and leadership, bless your church with the new life and unity. Help us, like her, to yearn for the gospel of Christ, and to reconcile those who are divided, through him who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Take care, folks. Have a good day.